She called the cops on him, without realizing he was her landlord. The sun hung high over Springfield, Missouri, casting long shadows over the well-manicured lawns of Clearview Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, especially Ellen Whitaker. She was trimming the hedges along her front walkway when movement caught her eye. Across the street, a man she didn't recognize was working in the yard of the house next door. He was pulling weeds, adjusting the sprinkler system, and arranging patio furniture like he owned the place. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That wasn't right. The house belonged to a nice couple who had moved out months ago. She was sure they had been renting it out. But to who? Ellen narrowed her eyes. He didn't look like the kind of person who should be in this neighborhood. Not that she was racist. Of course not. But she knew trouble when she saw it. And this looked like trouble. She let her shears clatter onto the porch table, wiped her hands on her gardening gloves, and marched across the street. "Excuse me." Her voice came out sharper than intended, but she didn't care. She stopped just short of the front lawn, crossing her arms. "What exactly are you doing here?" The man straightened up from where he'd been adjusting a flower bed, brushing dirt off his jeans. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and an easy posture. "I live here," he said simply, like that was supposed to settle things. Ellen blinked. "You live here?" "That's right." Her nose wrinkled. "Since when?" "A few months now." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "And you are?" "Ellen Whitaker. I live right across the street." She waved a hand toward her house. "I've been in this neighborhood for years, and I know for a fact the people who owned this place moved out. This house was supposed to be rented, not—" She hesitated. "Taken over by some stranger." The man didn't react. If anything, he looked amused. "Taken over? Ma'am, I own this house." Ellen's eyes flickered with disbelief. "That's not possible." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Well, it is." Something about his calm demeanor made her even more irritated. He didn't seem nervous, didn't seem like he had something to hide. But that didn't mean he wasn't lying. "I'm going to have to ask you to prove that," she said, standing a little taller. The man sighed, shook his head slightly, and turned back to his work. "I don't have to prove anything to you." That set her off. "Excuse me, this is a private neighborhood. I have every right to know if someone is squatting in a home next door to me." He chuckled under his breath, like she was making a fool of herself. "Squatting? Lady, I'm not squatting." Her jaw tightened. "Then you won't mind showing me some proof, right?" He exhaled through his nose, clearly losing patience. "I don't owe you that." That was it. She wasn't going to let this slide. Ellen whipped out her phone. "Fine. If you won't prove it, I'll get someone who will. You don't belong here, and I will get to the bottom of this." The man shook his head again, muttered something under his breath, and went back to his work like she wasn't even standing there. That infuriated her more than anything. But she had a plan, and soon he'd regret thinking he could just waltz into her neighborhood without consequences. But Ellen had no idea that she was about to become the one caught off guard. Ellen stormed back across the street, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Who did he think he was, brushing her off like that? She climbed the steps to her porch and immediately pulled up the number for the Clearview Estates Homeowners Association, HOA. If there was one thing she could count on, it was them. They didn't tolerate anything that disturbed the harmony of the neighborhood. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Clearview Estates, HOA. This is Brenda speaking." Ellen didn't waste a second. "Brenda, it's Ellen Whitaker from 114. Listen, we have a problem. There's a man over at 166. Some stranger says he owns the place. I know for a fact the previous owners moved out, and I'm pretty sure this guy's not supposed to be there." Brenda let out a little sigh, the kind that said she was already regretting picking up the call. Ellen, are you sure he's not a new homeowner? We process sales all the time. Maybe he bought the house. Ellen scoffed. Oh, please. Do you really think I wouldn't know if there was a sale? I talked to everyone on this street. No one mentioned new owners. I think we've got a squatter on our hands. Brenda hesitated. That's a serious accusation. Did you talk to him? Yes. He got all defensive, refused to show any proof of ownership. Ellen's voice rose. If he really owned the house, why not just show me? There was a pause on the other end. Then, I can check the records and see if we have anything on file. Great, Ellen said, tapping her foot impatiently. Brenda put her on hold. Ellen stared across the street, watching the man. No, the intruder, as he calmly watered the lawn. He was acting like he belonged there. But that was the problem. He didn't. After what felt like forever, Brenda came back on the line. Ellen. Brenda's voice sounded careful now. The house was sold about 6 months ago. It's under a new owner. Ellen froze. What? The records show it's owned by a man named Daniel Harris. That made no sense. How could the house have been sold without her knowing? The only way that could happen was if... Her stomach twisted. She had rented this house out, hadn't she? Years ago, when she hit some financial trouble. It had been temporary. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But now... Ellen? Brenda's voice pulled her back. I can send over a copy of the deed if you'd like, but as far as we're concerned, Mr. Harris has every right to be there. Ellen swallowed hard. No, this isn't right. Something's not adding up. Brenda exhaled. Ellen, I think you should. But Ellen had already hung up. If the HOA wouldn't do anything, she'd go higher. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Officer Tom Wilkins, a local cop she'd known for years. It rang. Once. Twice. Wilkins, a gruff voice answered. Tom, it's Ellen, she said, her words rushing out. I need an officer over here now. There's a man trespassing at 116 Clearview Drive. Says he owns the place, but something about it isn't right. Did you see him break in? Wilkins asked, his tone skeptical. No, but he's been lurking around, messing with the yard, and he refused to prove he's supposed to be there. Wilkins sighed. Ellen, we can't just show up because someone looks suspicious. Ellen felt heat rise to her face. Tom, I know this neighborhood. I know when someone doesn't belong. Can't you just do a welfare check? At least make sure he's telling the truth? Another sigh. Then reluctantly, all right, I'll swing by. She exhaled in relief. Thank you, Tom. Hanging up, she folded her arms and smirked across the street. Let's see how confident that man was when the police got involved. But Ellen was about to find out that she wasn't as powerful as she thought. The unmistakable blue and red lights reflected off the pristine white garage doors of 116 Clearview Drive as a patrol car rolled up the quiet suburban street. Ellen watched from her porch, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line of satisfaction. Officer Tom Wilkins stepped out first, a man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and a gut that hinted at too many diner breakfasts. Beside him, Officer Naomi Brooks, younger, sharper, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. Ellen wasted no time. She marched down her front steps, meeting them before they even reached the yard. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said, casting a glance toward the man still working in the yard. He didn't seem fazed, didn't even acknowledge the police's arrival. That irritated her. Wilkins adjusted his belt. All right, Ellen, tell me what's going on. She crossed her arms. This man, Daniel Harris, claims he owns this house. I find that very hard to believe. Officer Brooks raised an eyebrow. Why's that? Ellen blinked. Because the previous owners moved out months ago, and I never heard about a sale. He won't show me any proof that he lives here legally. I have a feeling he's squatting. Wilkins sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. All right, let's go talk to him. The two officers approached Daniel, who had just finished adjusting a potted plant on his porch. He turned, hands in his pockets, his expression calm. Good evening, sir, Wilkins greeted. Mind if we ask you a few questions? Daniel nodded, completely unfazed. Sure. What's going on? Wilkins glanced back at Ellen before speaking. We got a call about a possible trespassing situation. The woman across the street claims you don't belong here. Daniel let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Let me guess. Ellen. Officer Brooks turned slightly toward Ellen, her gaze sharp. You two have spoken already? Oh, she spoke to me all right, Daniel said, amusement in his tone. Demanded I prove I live here. When I didn't, I guess she called you guys. Wilkins sighed. Sir, do you have any form of identification that shows you live here? A utility bill? A driver's license with this address? Daniel nodded, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out his wallet. He handed Wilkins his ID, clear as day, the address 166 Clearview Drive. Ellen's stomach twisted. Officer Brooks peered over Wilkins' shoulder, nodded. That checks out. Wilkins handed the ID back. Sorry about the trouble, sir. Just doing our job. But Ellen wasn't done. She took a step forward, her voice sharp. That doesn't prove he owns the house. He could be renting. Daniel exhaled through his nose, clearly running low on patience. You're right, he said, pulling out his phone. Let's settle this once and for all. A few taps on his screen, and then he turned it toward the officers. The deed. His name, in black and white. Officer Brooks took a step closer, scanning the screen. Her expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes, something that said she understood exactly what was happening here. Wilkins nodded, clearing his throat. That's official. This man owns the house. Ellen's heart dropped. No, that couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. But, she started, but Officer Brooks cut her off. Mrs. Whitaker, did you check the HOA records before calling us? Ellen swallowed. They said the house was sold, but I just... Officer Brooks raised an eyebrow. But what? Ellen had nothing to say. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket and sighed. Look, I don't know what you were hoping to accomplish here, but I'm not going anywhere. You should probably check your paperwork before accusing people of things. Ellen's paperwork. Something cold slid down her spine. She had been renting this house out after falling behind on her mortgage years ago. She was supposed to buy it back once she got back on her feet. But she never checked the details of her agreement. And now, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. Had she, somehow, lost ownership of her own home? But the real shock was yet to come. Ellen felt her throat tighten. The heat from the summer sun was nothing compared to the burning sensation creeping up her neck. This was impossible. It had to be. She forced a laugh, short, clipped, brittle. There's been some sort of mix-up. I know this house. I used to own it. Daniel crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. Used to. Ellen opened her mouth but had no answer. Officer Brooks exchanged a glance with Wilkins before turning back to Ellen. Mrs. Whitaker, do you have any paperwork proving your ownership? Ellen's heart pounded. She had lived here for over a decade. She had to still own it, right? She whipped out her phone, fingers trembling as she logged into her email, searching through old documents. The silence stretched between them as she scrolled. A knot formed in her stomach. Finally, she found it. The rental agreement, her lease. Her lease. Not a mortgage, not a deed. A lease agreement. Signed 2 years ago. Expiring in 3 months. Her breath hitched. This was a mistake. It had to be. Hands shaking, she scrolled further, clicking through old messages from the investment company she had sold the house to when she was in financial trouble. She had planned to buy it back. It was always meant to be temporary. But then she saw it. The email she had ignored. The one titled, Final Sale Confirmation, 116 Clearview Drive. Her fingers went numb. She clicked on it, eyes scanning the words, but they blurred together. The company had sold the house. Her house. And the buyer? Daniel Harris. The breath rushed out of her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't his rental. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't squatting. He was her landlord. Ellen's knees nearly buckled. The phone slipped slightly from her grip before she caught it. Her hands shook so violently she had to steady herself against the porch railing. She wasn't the owner. She was the tenant. And she had been trying to evict her own landlord. Wilkins and Brooks must have caught the change in her expression, because Wilkins cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, are you all right?" Ellen blinked rapidly, her lips parting, but no words came out. Daniel, meanwhile, was watching her with something unreadable in his expression. Not gloating, not smug, just watching. Finally, he spoke. "You figured it out, didn't you?" Ellen's mouth was dry. She barely nodded. Daniel exhaled. "I bought this house legally. Paid cash. The company that sold it to me. Your investment company. The one you signed an agreement with." Ellen's stomach twisted painfully. He knew. How long had he known? Had he been waiting for this moment? Officer Brooks let out a small breath through her nose, shifting her weight slightly. "Well," she said finally, "I think it's safe to say there's no trespassing issue here." Wilkins, looking suddenly uncomfortable, nodded. "Yeah, this is a civil matter now, not a police one." Ellen barely heard them. The words buzzed around her, meaningless. She had spent years looking down on renters, always prided herself on being a homeowner in a respectable neighborhood. And now, she was at the mercy of the very man she had just tried to have removed. Her landlord. But Daniel wasn't done yet. Ellen's legs felt like lead as she stood there gripping her phone like a lifeline. The weight of the truth settled heavily on her chest, pressing down harder with each passing second. She had called the police on the man who owned her house. She had tried to kick out her own landlord. Wilkins and Brooks exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Wilkins, eager to be done with this, adjusted his belt and turned to Daniel. "Well, Mr. Harris, since there's no actual crime here, I think we're done. Sorry for the trouble." Daniel gave a slow nod. "Appreciate that, officer." Brooks, however, lingered for just a moment longer. Her sharp gaze flickered from Ellen to Daniel, as if silently acknowledging something neither of them wanted to say out loud. Then she gave a small nod and followed Wilkins back to the patrol car. The second the cruiser pulled away, silence settled over the street. For the first time, Ellen truly looked at Daniel, not as an intruder, not as someone who didn't belong, but as the man who now held control over her future. Her mouth felt dry. I didn't know." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "No, you didn't." Ellen swallowed hard. "I thought—" She stopped herself. What had she thought? That he was squatting, that he wasn't the kind of person who could afford a home in this neighborhood, that she still had power here. Daniel let out a breath, shaking his head. "You didn't even check your own paperwork before calling the cops on me. You just assumed." Ellen flinched. It sounded so much worse when he said it out loud. She could feel her world shrinking, the security she had once felt in this neighborhood slipping through her fingers. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've been living here for years, huh?" Ellen barely nodded. "And you really didn't know you were renting?" The humiliation burned through her. She had ignored the emails, skimmed over the lease agreement, convinced herself it was all temporary. But now she had no excuses left. Daniel tilted his head. Well, now you do. She looked up at him, unsure of what to say. What? What happens now? For the first time, Daniel truly smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that put someone at ease. It was the kind of smile that reminded you that your choices had consequences. Well, Ellen, he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. I guess that depends on me, doesn't it? Her stomach dropped. Daniel pulled out his phone, tapping on the screen before glancing back at her. Your lease expires in 3 months. Ellen felt her pulse spike. I could let you stay, Daniel continued, his tone thoughtful. But honestly, after today, after the way you treated me, why would I? Ellen's breath caught. Wait. Daniel held up a hand. No, you wait. She fell silent. I could have been anyone, Daniel said, his voice even but sharp. A friend of the owner, a family member, a guy hired to fix something. But you didn't ask. You didn't give me a chance. You just assumed the worst. And then you called the cops on me. In my own home. Ellen had nothing to say. Daniel studied her as if deciding something. I should evict you, he said. Her stomach twisted. Please, she whispered. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Lucky for you, I don't make decisions out of spite. But you better believe I have zero patience for this kind of nonsense. Ellen clutched her arms, feeling like a child being scolded. Daniel took a step back. You've got 3 months left. If you want to renew, we'll talk. But if I hear so much as a whisper about you making trouble for me again, you're out. No discussion. Ellen barely breathed. I understand. Daniel nodded. Good. Then, without another word, he turned and walked inside, shutting the door behind him. Ellen stood there, her face burning, her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't the one in control, but the real lesson hadn't even sunk in yet. Ellen sat on her front porch long after Daniel had gone inside. The weight of everything settled heavily on her chest. For years, she had lived under the illusion of ownership, control, power, the belief that she was somehow above the people who rented in this neighborhood. And now, she was one of them. Worse than that, she had nearly lost her home because of her own ignorance. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her emails again, rereading the documents she had ignored for years. The warnings had been there. The papers had been signed. And yet, she had been so sure that her version of reality was the right one. So sure that she had nearly ruined someone else's life over it. She thought back to the way she had looked at Daniel, the way she had assumed the worst before she even knew his name. If he had been anyone else, someone without documentation, someone without patience, how different would this have gone? She had called the police on the man who owned her home. What if things had escalated? What if Daniel had gotten angry? What if the officers had been different? The thought made her sick. She had lost power over this neighborhood, but maybe she had never really had it to begin with. 3 months. That's how long she had left to figure out where to go from here. She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. Maybe this was what she deserved. Maybe it was time she finally learned. How many times have you made a judgment about someone without knowing their full story? How often do we assume we're in control, only to find out we never were? This story is a reminder that ignorance is dangerous, entitlement is fragile, and sometimes the truth humbles us in the most unexpected ways. Think before you judge, read before you sign, and always check your own paperwork.